The cruelest thing about humiliation is that everyone remembers it except the person who caused it. The sharp smell of burned coffee lingered in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor of Reed Global, while Olivia Hayes stood motionless beside the projector screen, trying not to let her hands shake. A dark stain spread slowly across the printed reports she had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing. Around the massive walnut table, executives avoided eye contact, pretending to study their laptops while the vice president of marketing, Vanessa Cole, leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. "Maybe next time," Vanessa said coldly. "You'll focus less on dressing like a clearance rack assistant and more on proofreading the numbers." A few uncomfortable laughs slipped through the room. Olivia felt heat crawl into her face. Her beige blazer suddenly felt too tight, too cheap, too obvious. She swallowed hard and stared down at the ruined papers in her arms. 12 hours ago, those reports had been perfect. She knew because she had rebuilt the entire campaign herself after discovering Vanessa's team had nearly tanked a $200 million account. But now, standing under the bright conference lights, none of that mattered. Vanessa had spoken first. And in rooms like this, the first voice usually won. Olivia bent quietly to collect the papers scattered near her heels. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't even sure what she was apologizing for anymore. The city skyline glowed behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, cold and silver beneath the February rain. Chicago looked beautiful from 42 floors up, untouchable, a world away from the cramped studio apartment Olivia could barely afford on the south side. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence," Vanessa replied. "Maybe Reed Global just isn't the place for girls like you." This time, nobody laughed. The words hung too heavily in the air. Olivia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm, because losing control here meant losing everything. Her father's hospital bills were already stacked on the tiny kitchen counter back home. Rent was 5 days overdue. And tonight after work, she still had another 6-hour shift waiting tables at a jazz bar downtown. She could not afford to break. Not here. Not now. Then a deep voice cut through the silence. "Interesting." Every head in the room turned instantly toward the doorway. Sebastian Reed stood there with one hand in the pocket of his charcoal coat, rainwater still clinging to the dark fabric. At 41, the billionaire founder of Reed Global carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms without effort. Sharp jawline, calm gray eyes, controlled movements that made everyone else seem nervous by comparison. Olivia had only seen him twice before from a distance, but now his attention rested entirely on her. Not Vanessa, not the executives, her. Sebastian stepped into the room slowly, his gaze lowering to the coffee-soaked reports in Olivia's trembling hands. "Tell me something," he said evenly. "If these numbers are so wrong." He lifted one stained page from the table and studied it for a moment. "Then why did this version predict the exact market shift our competitors missed this morning?" The room froze. Vanessa's confident expression cracked instantly. Olivia blinked in confusion. Sebastian looked up from the paper, his eyes settling on Olivia once more. And for the first time all morning, someone in that room looked at her like she actually mattered. The silence inside the conference room became almost unbearable. Vanessa straightened in her chair so quickly that the wheels scraped against the polished floor. "Sebastian, there has clearly been some misunderstanding," she said carefully, forcing a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. But Sebastian Reed did not look at her. His attention remained on the stained report in his hands while rain tapped softly against the towering windows behind him. "There is no misunderstanding," he replied calmly. "These projections anticipated the supply issue in Seattle nearly 12 hours before the market reacted." He flipped another page. "And whoever built this recovery strategy prevented us from losing close to $80 million by tomorrow morning." A nervous murmur spread across the room. Olivia stood frozen beside the projector screen, still clutching the ruined papers against her chest. For a second, she honestly thought she might faint. Sebastian slowly lifted his eyes toward her. "Did you create this?" The question landed softly, but every executive at the table suddenly looked at Olivia like they were seeing her for the first time. She hesitated. Her instincts screamed at her to stay invisible. Invisible people survived places like Reed Global. Invisible people kept their jobs. But lying now felt impossible. "Yes," she admitted quietly. Vanessa laughed once under her breath. She adjusted a few slides. "That is all." Sebastian finally turned toward Vanessa, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Really? He asked. Then perhaps you can explain page 14. Vanessa opened her mouth, but said nothing. Because page 14 contained a detailed market correction model that only someone deeply familiar with the campaign could have built. Olivia had spent 2 nights teaching herself predictive trend software just to create it. Sebastian waited exactly 3 seconds before speaking again. That is what I thought. Vanessa's face lost color. Olivia could barely breathe. Sebastian placed the papers carefully onto the conference table. Meeting adjourned, he said evenly. Chairs moved immediately. Executives gathered laptops and rushed toward the doors, desperate to escape the tension hanging over the room. Vanessa shot Olivia a glare sharp enough to cut glass before disappearing into the hallway. Within moments, only Olivia and Sebastian remained. The room suddenly felt far too large. Olivia lowered her eyes quickly, embarrassed by the coffee stains soaking through her sleeves. "Thank you," she whispered. Sebastian studied her for a moment. "Why did you let her humiliate you?" Olivia gave a tired laugh that barely sounded real. "Because she signs my paychecks." That answer does not fit the person who built this campaign. She looked up before she could stop herself. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something steady in his gaze. Curiosity, respect, maybe even concern. It unsettled her more than Vanessa's cruelty ever had. "People like me do not usually win arguments in rooms like this," Olivia said softly. Sebastian glanced toward the empty chairs around the conference table. "That sounds less like experience and more like disappointment." Olivia swallowed hard. She thought about overdue rent notices sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. Her father asleep in a hospital room 3 miles away. The second job waiting for her downtown tonight. "Sometimes disappointment is just experience repeated enough times," she said quietly. For the first time, Sebastian's expression shifted slightly. Not pity, something heavier. Then his phone buzzed in his coat pocket, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen briefly before slipping it away. "Do you always stay this late?" he asked. Olivia nodded. "Most nights." "Why?" She forced a small smile. "Chicago rent is expensive." To her surprise, the corner of Sebastian's mouth almost lifted. Almost. Then his eyes dropped to the stained folder still pressed against her chest. "Bring me a clean copy of your full strategy tomorrow morning at 8. Olivia blinked. "Directly to your office?" "Unless you know another billionaire named Sebastian Reed." Her heart stumbled painfully against her ribs. Because something told her that walking into his office tomorrow morning was going to change far more than her job. Olivia barely slept that night. The old radiator inside her studio apartment hissed unevenly, while Chicago rain tapped against the small window near her bed. Her laptop glowed on the tiny kitchen table beside stacks of unpaid bills and a half-finished cup of instant coffee gone cold hours ago. She rubbed tired eyes and checked the clock again. 4:23 in the morning. In less than 4 hours, she would walk into the office of one of the most powerful billionaires in America. The thought alone made her stomach twist. Across the room, her phone buzzed softly with another hospital notification. Payment reminder. Past due. Olivia closed her eyes for a second before locking the screen. She could not think about that right now. Not if she wanted to survive tomorrow. She opened her campaign presentation again, reviewing every detail line by line. Market predictions, brand recovery, strategies, consumer trust data. She had rebuilt everything from scratch while executives twice her salary took credit for ideas they barely understood. Normally, she would have stayed invisible. Safe. But Sebastian Reed had looked directly at her yesterday, like he had seen something no one else bothered to notice. That terrified her more than Vanessa ever could. By 7:30, downtown Chicago was wrapped in cold gray fog as Olivia hurried through the revolving doors of Reed Global, carrying a fresh printed copy of her strategy inside a navy binder she bought 3 years ago from a clearance bin. The marble lobby gleamed beneath golden lights while employees moved around her with polished confidence and $1,000 coats. Olivia instinctively lowered her gaze as she crossed toward the private executive elevators. "Miss Hayes." She stopped instantly. One of Sebastian Reed's personal assistants approached her with a professional smile. "Mr. Reed is waiting for you upstairs." Waiting for her. The words alone felt unreal. The private elevator climbed silently toward the top floor while Olivia tried to steady her breathing. When the doors opened, She stepped into a hallway, so quiet it barely felt connected to the chaos below. Dark wood walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, soft jazz music drifting somewhere in the distance. Everything about Sebastian Reed's world felt controlled, precise, untouchable. His office doors stood partially open. Olivia hesitated before knocking softly. "Come in." Sebastian stood near the massive windows overlooking Lake Michigan, one hand wrapped around a black coffee mug. Morning light cut across the sharp lines of his charcoal suit. Without the tension of the conference room, he somehow looked even more intimidating, more dangerous in a quieter way. He turned as Olivia entered. His eyes dropped briefly to the binder in her arms. "You came prepared." Olivia handed it to him carefully. "I updated the projections overnight." Sebastian opened the binder immediately, scanning several pages in silence. Olivia remained standing near the doorway, trying not to fidget under the weight of the silence. Finally, he looked up. "Sit down, Olivia." Hearing her first name in his voice felt strangely personal. She sat slowly across from his desk, while Sebastian continued reading. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The only sound in the room was the turning of paper and distant thunder outside the windows. Olivia's pulse pounded harder with every second. Then Sebastian closed the binder carefully. "You should not be an assistant." Olivia blinked. "Excuse me. These strategies are executive level." He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her with calm intensity. "So either Reed Global has overlooked extraordinary talent," his eyes narrowed slightly, "or you have spent a very long time convincing yourself to stay small." Olivia looked down at her hands immediately, because somehow that second possibility hurt more. Olivia forced a quiet laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You make it sound easy." Sebastian rested his forearms against the edge of the desk. "No, easy is pretending talent does not exist because it makes other people uncomfortable." The storm clouds outside darkened the office windows, casting soft shadows across the room. Olivia looked away first. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this before. Not teachers, not managers, not even her father before life became hospitals and medical bills and exhaustion. People usually saw her as temporary, replaceable, conveniently invisible. Sebastian Reed looked at her like she was a problem he wanted to solve. And that alone felt dangerous. "You do not know anything about me," she said quietly. "Then tell me." The answer came too fast, too direct. Olivia blinked in surprise while Sebastian simply waited. Calm, patient, like a man fully accustomed to silence bending around him instead of against him. She tightened her grip around the edge of the chair. "There is not much to tell." "I doubt that." A faint trace of amusement touched his voice before disappearing again. He stood and walked toward a small bar near the windows, pouring another cup of black coffee. "Most people at Reed Global spend entire meetings trying to sound intelligent. You spent 3 nights rebuilding a failing campaign without asking for credit." He glanced toward her. "Over the rim of the cup. That usually means one of two things. Either you are very insecure," he paused, "or very exhausted." Olivia stared down at her hands because the second answer landed far too close to the truth. Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him probably noticed everything. "Exhausted people survive by becoming useful," she admitted softly. "Useful people do not get fired." Sebastian studied her for a long moment after that. The office suddenly felt strangely quiet beneath the rain outside. Then his eyes moved briefly toward the sleeve of her blazer, where a tiny stitched tear near the wrist had started to come undone. Olivia instinctively pulled her arm back. Embarrassment warmed her cheeks instantly. But Sebastian said nothing about it. Somehow that made it worse. "Do you know what I see when I look at Reed Global?" he asked finally. Olivia shook her head carefully. A company filled with people terrified of looking weak. His voice remained calm, but something colder moved beneath the surface now. That fear cost them creativity, loyalty, innovation. He walked slowly back toward the desk. Then someone like you walks in carrying brilliance inside a $5 blazer, and suddenly everyone feels threatened. Olivia looked up sharply. "You do not have to pity me." Sebastian's expression hardened slightly. "I do not pity you." The answer came instantly. "Absolute. Pity is useless." The room fell silent again. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat now. Steady, uneven, confused. Sebastian opened the navy binder once more, flipping toward the final pages of her strategy. "You included a full rebrand proposal for the Seattle account. Olivia nodded slowly. I stayed after hours to finish it. Without being asked. Someone had to. Sebastian leaned back in his chair again, eyes never leaving hers this time. Good. Olivia frowned slightly. Good. I am giving you temporary access to the executive strategy team effective today. Her breath caught instantly. What? You heard me. Vanessa is going to lose her mind. For the first time, Sebastian actually smiled. Small, brief, dangerous. That is not necessarily a downside. Olivia stared at him, completely speechless now. Temporary access to the executive team was the kind of opportunity employees fought years to receive. People sacrificed friendships for positions like that. Meanwhile, she still waited tables at a jazz bar 4 nights a week just to keep her father's treatment going. None of this felt real. Sebastian closed the binder carefully. There is one condition. Olivia's stomach tightened immediately. What condition? He held her gaze steadily. Stop apologizing every time you walk into a room. By the end of the week, Olivia felt like her entire world had tilted sideways. Employees who had ignored her for months suddenly watched her every move whenever she stepped into a meeting beside Sebastian Reed. Conversations stopped when she entered break rooms. Whispers followed her down marble hallways. Some people looked jealous. Others looked confused. Vanessa Cole looked furious. Olivia tried to keep her head down, but that became impossible after Sebastian personally requested her presence in 3 executive strategy sessions back-to-back. The first time it happened, nearly every senior manager at the table stared at her like she had accidentally wandered into the wrong floor. Sebastian noticed immediately. If anyone here has a problem with Miss Hayes attending this meeting, he said calmly while reviewing financial projections, you are welcome to outperform her work. Silence. Absolute silence. Olivia felt heat rise into her cheeks again, but this time it was different. Not humiliation. Pressure. Dangerous pressure. Because now everyone expected her to fail. That night, freezing wind swept through downtown Chicago while Olivia hurried into Velvet Note Jazz Lounge wearing her black waitress apron over office clothes she had no time to change out of. Warm saxophone music drifted through the dim amber lighting while tired customers filled the small tables near the stage. Normally the jazz bar felt like escape. Safe. Predictable. But tonight her thoughts kept circling back to Sebastian Reed and the impossible way he looked at her during meetings. Like he expected greatness from her before she even believed it herself. Earth 2. Olivia. She blinked quickly as Mia, another waitress, slid beside her carrying a tray of drinks. You have looked terrified all night. What happened? Olivia forced a small smile. Long week. Rich people. Olivia laughed softly despite herself. Very rich people. Mia raised an eyebrow. Those are always the worst kind. Olivia grabbed menus and turned toward the next table before she could answer. The lounge doors opened just then, letting cold air sweep briefly through the room. Olivia looked up automatically and nearly stopped breathing. Sebastian Reed walked inside wearing a dark wool coat, snowflakes melting slowly against his shoulders. Every sound inside the lounge seemed to blur for a second. He did not belong here. Men like him belonged in private clubs overlooking city skylines, not hidden jazz bars on the south side. Yet somehow he moved through the room with the same calm control he carried everywhere else. Olivia stared in complete shock as the hostess nervously guided him toward a quiet corner table near the stage. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Sebastian gave the smallest nod. Like this was perfectly normal. Like billionaires casually appeared in their assistant's second job every night. Oh my God, Mia whispered beside her. Who is that? Olivia swallowed hard. My boss. Mia nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Your boss owns half the city? Olivia ignored her and forced herself toward Sebastian's table, pulse pounding painfully now. Good evening, she said carefully, trying to sound professional while holding a water glass with slightly trembling fingers. I did not know you liked jazz. Sebastian looked up at her beneath the dim golden lights. Without the glass towers and boardrooms around him, he somehow looked less distant here. More human. I do not, he admitted calmly. Olivia frowned slightly. Then why are you here? Sebastian's gray eyes held hers for one quiet second before he answered. Because I wanted to see who you become when nobody at Reed Global is watching. Olivia's breath caught instantly, and for the first time since meeting Sebastian Reed, she realized this was no longer just about work. Olivia stood there, for a moment longer than she should have, gripping her order pad while soft jazz music drifted through the lounge. Sebastian Reed calmly removed his coat and placed it beside him like he belonged in the tiny club hidden between an old laundromat and a corner pharmacy. Nothing about this made sense. Billionaires did not visit places like Velvet Note. Men like Sebastian certainly did not spend Friday nights watching exhausted waitresses carry trays through crowded rooms. Yet there he was, sitting beneath warm amber lights while snow fell quietly outside the windows. Olivia finally found her voice. "You came all the way downtown to study me?" Sebastian's expression barely changed. "That sounds more dramatic than it is. You are sitting in a jazz bar I never told you about. Your employee file listed your second job." Olivia's stomach tightened instantly. Of course it did. Reed Global probably knew everything about its employees. But hearing it out loud still felt strangely invasive. Sebastian noticed the shift in her expression immediately. "I did not come here to embarrass you," he said calmly. "Then why did you?" For the first time since entering the lounge, he looked away briefly toward the small stage where an older musician played slow piano beneath dim lights. "Because people reveal themselves when they think nobody important is watching." Olivia frowned softly. "And what exactly am I revealing?" Sebastian looked back at her. "That you smile more here." The answer caught her completely off guard. Before she could respond, another waitress hurried over asking Olivia to cover 3 new tables near the back. The lounge had suddenly filled with customers escaping the snowstorm outside. Olivia nodded quickly, grateful for the interruption. "I should work." Sebastian gave a small nod. "Of course." But even after she walked away, Olivia could still feel his eyes following her through the crowded room. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of coffee refills, dinner orders, and low jazz melodies drifting beneath warm lighting. Yet every time Olivia glanced toward the corner table, Sebastian remained there quietly observing everything around him. Not with arrogance. Not with judgment. Curiosity. At one point, she caught him watching an elderly janitor carefully help a customer whose cane had slipped near the stage. Another time she noticed him leave a folded $100 bill beneath an untouched cup of coffee after overhearing the bartender mention medical bills for his wife. He acted like no one would notice. Olivia noticed anyway. Around midnight, the crowd finally thinned. Chairs scraped softly against wooden floors while employees began cleaning tables for closing. Olivia approached Sebastian carefully, exhaustion settling heavily into her shoulders now. "You stayed all night." Sebastian glanced toward the nearly empty stage. "Apparently, I like jazz more than I thought." Olivia laughed quietly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them, because it felt easy, natural. Sebastian's expression softened slightly at the sound. "You should laugh more often." Olivia crossed her arms lightly. "You should stop saying things that confuse me." His eyes held her steadily now. "That might be difficult." Heat rose into Olivia's cheeks instantly, and she looked away toward the windows where snow covered the sidewalks outside in white silence. Dangerous. This entire situation felt dangerous. Not because Sebastian Reed was cruel. Somehow that would have been easier. The problem was that beneath the billionaire reputation and impossible confidence, she was starting to see pieces of loneliness hiding underneath him. And lonely people recognized each other quickly. Sebastian stood slowly from the table, reaching for his coat. "How are you getting home?" "Train." He glanced toward the snowstorm outside. "At midnight." Olivia shrugged lightly. "That is usually how being poor works." Sebastian studied her for one quiet second before holding out his car keys. "Come with me." Olivia blinked immediately. "Excuse me. My driver is outside." His voice remained calm, controlled, impossible to read. "And Chicago trains are not safe this late during a storm." Olivia hesitated instantly. Every instinct told her this crossed a line. Bosses did not drive assistants home after midnight. Billionaires definitely did not. But outside, heavy snow buried the streets in freezing wind while Sebastian Reed stood waiting beside the table with an expression that somehow made refusal feel impossible. The Blacktown car moved silently through snow-covered Chicago streets while Olivia sat stiffly beside the window, clutching her worn bag tightly against her lap. Warm air filled the back seat, fogging the glass slightly as city lights blurred past outside in streaks of gold and white. Sebastian sat across from her in complete calm, one hand resting loosely against the leather seat, while soft piano music played quietly through the speakers. Everything about this felt unreal. 24 hours ago, she had been publicly humiliated in a conference room. Now she was riding through downtown Chicago beside one of the richest men in the country at nearly 1 in the morning. Olivia looked down at her waitress apron still folded inside her bag and suddenly felt painfully aware of every difference between them. Sebastian noticed her silence. Of course he did. "You are thinking too loudly," he said softly. Olivia glanced toward him with tired amusement. "Is that another billionaire skill?" No, his expression barely shifted. Just observation. Snow continued falling harder outside, while traffic slowed near the river. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them no longer felt awkward. That somehow unsettled Olivia even more. Finally, Sebastian broke the silence again. "How long have you been working 2 jobs?" Olivia hesitated. "About 18 months. That long?" She nodded faintly. "After my father got sick." Sebastian's eyes shifted slightly then. Softer somehow. "What happened?" Olivia stared out the window before answering. "Heart failure." The words came out carefully practiced now, worn smooth from repetition. "Insurance covered some of it." "Not enough." Sebastian said nothing immediately. Most people rushed to apologize when they heard things like that. Or worse, they offered pity disguised as kindness. Sebastian simply listened. "So you work all day at Reed Global," he said quietly, "then spend nights carrying trays until midnight." Olivia gave a small shrug. "Bills do not care. If you are tired." A faint shadow crossed Sebastian's face at that. The car stopped briefly at a red light, while snowflakes drifted slowly beneath glowing street lamps outside. "You should not have to survive like that," he said finally. Olivia turned toward him instantly. "Do not do that." His gaze narrowed slightly. "Do what?" "Talk like I am some tragic charity case." The words came out sharper than she intended, but exhaustion had stripped away her usual caution tonight. Sebastian remained completely calm. "I do not see you as charity." "Then what do you see?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Silence filled the car for one long second. Sebastian held her gaze steadily beneath the soft lights overhead. "Someone who has been carrying too much alone for too long." Olivia looked away immediately because something about the honesty in his voice hit too deep. Outside, the storm thickened across the city skyline. The driver turned onto quieter streets near the south side. Olivia suddenly realized where they were heading and stiffened slightly. Her neighborhood looked nothing like Sebastian's world. Old brick buildings, flickering signs, tiny grocery stores still open past midnight. She felt embarrassed before they even stopped. "You can let me out here," she said quickly. Sebastian glanced outside. "Your apartment is 3 blocks away." Olivia frowned in confusion. "How do you know that?" The second the words left her mouth, the atmosphere inside the car changed. Subtly, but enough. Sebastian's expression remained controlled, yet Olivia noticed the pause before he answered. "Your employee address is on file." Olivia nodded slowly, though something uneasy settled into her chest now. The car finally stopped beside her apartment building, its cracked front steps buried beneath snow. Sebastian looked through the window quietly. "You live here alone?" "Most of the time." He studied the building for another second before turning back toward her. "Olivia." The sound of her name in his voice made her heartbeat stumble again. "You are better than the life you have convinced yourself to settle for." Olivia swallowed hard. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with pity, not with desire, with certainty. She opened the car door carefully, freezing wind rushing instantly into the warmth of the back seat. Then she paused and looked back at him one last time. "Why are you really helping me?" Sebastian's gray eyes held hers steadily through the falling snow. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." Monday morning felt different the second Olivia stepped into Reed Global. Conversations lowered when she passed through the lobby. Employees glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Rumors moved faster than elevators inside billion-dollar companies, and by now everyone had noticed Sebastian Reed's sudden interest in the assistant nobody used to see. Olivia tightened her grip on her coffee cup while stepping into the executive elevator alone. She told herself to stay calm, to stay professional. But deep down, something had shifted after that night in the car. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her struggles and seen strength instead of weakness. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Before Olivia could even reach her desk, Vanessa Cole's sharp voice cut through the hallway. "There she is." Olivia stopped immediately. Several employees nearby suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. Vanessa approached slowly in a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly rent. Her smile looked polished enough to fool strangers. Not Olivia. You seem very comfortable upstairs lately, Vanessa said lightly. Olivia kept her voice even. Mr. Reed asked me to join the strategy team. Please. Vanessa laughed quietly. Men like Sebastian Reed do not suddenly promote girls from broken neighborhoods because of hard work. Olivia felt the insult land exactly where Vanessa intended. But before she could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Interesting theory. The hallway instantly went silent. Sebastian walked toward them with calm, measured steps while several executives behind him quickly disappeared in the opposite direction. Vanessa's confident posture shifted immediately. Sebastian, I was just speaking with Olivia. I heard. His tone remained perfectly controlled. Somehow that made it worse. Sebastian stopped beside Olivia, his presence alone changing the entire atmosphere around them. Vanessa forced another smile. I only meant that sudden promotions can create misunderstandings in the office. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Then allow me to clarify. The silence became painfully sharp. Miss Hayes earned her position because she succeeded where senior executives failed. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. Sebastian continued without raising his voice. If anyone inside Reed Global has concerns about her qualifications, they are welcome to discuss them directly with me. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Olivia could actually hear her own heartbeat now. Sebastian turned toward her calmly. Conference room in 10 minutes. Then he walked away without another word. Vanessa stood frozen for half a second before spinning sharply on her heel and disappearing down the hallway. Olivia remained standing there in complete shock, while nearby employees suddenly avoided eye contact altogether. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of presentations and strategy discussions, but Olivia could still feel the weight of what happened in the hallway. Sebastian had publicly defended her. Not quietly, not indirectly, publicly. That mattered in places like this. By evening, snow drifted softly outside the office windows again, while most employees headed home. Olivia stayed late reviewing campaign numbers alone in one of the smaller conference rooms. The building felt quieter after dark, less performative. She rubbed tired eyes and reached for her coffee, just as the door opened behind her. Sebastian stepped inside, carrying 2 paper bags from a nearby restaurant. Olivia blinked in surprise. You are still here? He asked. I could ask you the same thing. A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. He placed one of the bags in front of her. You skipped lunch. Olivia stared at him. How do you know that? Sebastian loosened his tie slightly before sitting across from her. You stop concentrating around 7 o'clock when you have not eaten. Olivia looked at the bag. Slowly, warm steam drifted from inside. Chicken soup. Fresh bread. The kind her father used to bring home during winters before hospitals replaced normal life. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. You notice too much, she whispered. Sebastian watched her quietly for a moment beneath the soft conference room lights. No, he said softly. Most people simply notice too little. Olivia stared down at the cup of soup for a moment, unable to remember the last time someone had noticed something as small as whether she had eaten lunch. The steam curled softly between them while snow drifted beyond the dark conference room windows high above Chicago. Sebastian loosened the cuffs of his shirt slightly and opened his laptop beside a stack of financial reports, acting as though bringing dinner to exhausted employees was the most natural thing in the world. That somehow affected Olivia more than grand gestures ever could have. You do realize you are impossible to understand, she said quietly after a while. Sebastian glanced up from the screen. I hear that often. Olivia smiled faintly before tearing off a piece of warm bread. The silence between them settled into something calmer now, less guarded. She hated how comfortable that felt. Can I ask you something? Sebastian closed the laptop slowly. You usually ask anyway. Olivia rolled her eyes softly. Why me? His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened immediately. That is a very broad question. You know what I mean. She looked down at the soup briefly before continuing. You could have ignored me in that conference room like everyone else. You could have let Vanessa destroy me and nobody would have cared. So why did you not? Sebastian remained quiet for a moment, long enough that Olivia wondered if he planned to avoid the question entirely. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, his gray eyes resting on the snowy skyline outside. "When I was 23, he said calmly, I worked for a man who liked reminding poor employees exactly where they belonged." Olivia listened carefully now. Sebastian rarely spoke about himself. "One night I stayed awake for 40 hours rebuilding a client presentation after my entire team failed." A faint humorless smile touched his mouth. "The next morning my boss presented it as his own work while security escorted me out because my suit looked cheap." Olivia blinked in surprise. "You got fired? Publicly?" His voice remained calm, but something colder moved underneath it now. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Olivia stared at him differently after that. Not billionaire Sebastian Reed. Not the impossible man who controlled skyscrapers and boardrooms with a single glance. Just someone who remembered exactly what humiliation felt like. "So when you saw Vanessa, I recognized the room." The honesty in his voice settled deep inside her chest. Outside, wind rattled softly against the windows while the city glittered beneath falling snow. Olivia looked down at her hands. "I spent so much time trying not to be noticed," she admitted quietly. "I thought if I stayed useful enough, people would eventually respect me." Sebastian watched her carefully. "And did they?" Olivia laughed softly without humor. "Not really. That is because respect and usefulness are not the same thing." The room fell quiet again. Olivia realized then that somewhere between late-night strategy meetings and snow-covered car rides and jazz music downtown, Sebastian Reed had slowly become the first person in years who made her feel seen instead of evaluated. That realization terrified her. Because people with power could change your life. But people who understood your loneliness could change your heart. Sebastian checked the time before standing slowly from the table. "You should go home." Olivia nodded, gathering her papers carefully. As she reached for her bag, her phone suddenly buzzed against the table. Hospital caller ID flashed across the screen. Her stomach dropped instantly. Sebastian noticed the panic in her expression immediately. "Olivia." She answered quickly, pulse racing now. After only a few seconds, the color drained from her face completely. "I am coming right now," she whispered before hanging up. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her coat. Sebastian stepped closer immediately. "What happened?" Olivia struggled to steady her breathing. "My father collapsed." Fear tightened every word now. "They said his condition is getting worse." Without hesitation, Sebastian reached for his keys. "Come with me." Olivia looked up at him, shaken and overwhelmed beneath the harsh conference room lights. And in that moment, with the entire city glowing cold beyond the windows, she realized she no longer knew where her life ended and Sebastian Reed began.